Well, thank you for joining me, Mo. I'm so glad to be here today talking about I-9 and I-9 compliance. So for those who are watching, I just wanted to start out by doing an introduction. And so, Mo, I know you're in our immigration group and I am in our employment group at Offit Kurman. I know you're a part of the employment group as well. And I-9 compliance is something that has become a little bit newsworthy lately, just because there will be some changes happening as of July 31st, when some COVID era regulations will be phasing out and things will be changing, and there'll be some things for employers to start thinking about. But just kind of to get us started, I-9, Form I-9, I think most people are probably familiar with that or have had to fill out, have had an employer that has had to fill out that form for them, or they are an employer and they're familiar with having to keep these documents on hand, and their employment eligibility verification forms. So, important piece to making sure that employees are eligible to work. So what are some things that employers need to consider as we approach July 31st with I-9 compliance, Mo?
Sure. Thanks, Sarah. That's a very timely topic right now. So in terms of from the immigration side, we definitely have to make sure that our clients are aware of what the the specifications are on documents that demonstrate work authorization. So that fundamental list of acceptable documents has not changed. What is changing is that for a period of time, starting pretty much right as a result of the pandemic, the Department of Labor and the USCIS, they announced flexibility so employers could do remote I-9 inspections for situations where people were not coming into office. So the flexibility permitted employers to do a remote I-9 document review during the pandemic. And starting July 31st, this coming up, end of this coming July, employers will have to revert back to physical inspections. And so this will create some logistical issues and need a closer look at I-9 practices going forward, and we can talk about some of the specifics of how that process might look.
Yeah, it's interesting. I-9s are definitely one of those areas that there's definitely overlap between employment and immigration. I mean, that is a very common overlap in a lot of different areas, but I know that, yeah, I get questions that come up and I call you not infrequently to make sure that we've got everything situated for clients. But, it's one of those areas of our practice where it can be really straightforward, if they're just, in regular times when it was not COVID and you got your employee coming in their first day and you just, you got your list of documents, like you said, that have not changed. You know what they are. You get these documents, you make copies, you keep them, and you're all set, right? But then sometimes it can be a little bit more complicated. And during COVID, it certainly was, as you alluded to, obviously people aren't coming into the office and being onboarded in the same way. And so there was this rule change, which made a lot of sense at the time. And now it's being rolled back. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how this is going to impact employers who have now stayed very remote. So, what are some of the things you're advising clients, Mo, on folks who have a lot of remote workers or workers that came to them during COVID?
Yeah, so we can kind of look at the implementation of the flexibility and the termination of flexibility in the different durations. So employees that were hired on or after March 20th, 2020, that those would have been they would have used the employers in those instances were relying on the remote inspection. So they could assign an agent. They can do a remote inspection on, let's say, a Zoom or Teams call, and then fill out the I-9 form. So for those employees that were subjected to the flexibility, and they are still working, now the employers have to go back and do a physical inspection of those documents. So there will be a revisiting of the I-9 files and inspection, physical inspection of those eligibility documents and a notation on files. The more interesting, and then there's some prescribed ways of doing that. So basically, I'll get real quick, just short comment that once the documents have been physically inspected, the employer will add a note and say COVID-19, comma, documents physically examined, and then the date of that physical examination on the I-9 form. And there's a section 2 in the I-9 which needs some additional information, and then there's another section 3. So as appropriate, depending on what document it was that was physically examined, there's got to be a note put in there on the I-9 form. I think the interesting pieces that are now sort of emerging are that remote working has become a much more prevalent practice than it was pre-pandemic. So even though the flexibilities were designed to benefit, a temporary disruption where folks were not able to, because offices were due to pandemic lockdowns and quarantine issues, folks weren't physically coming into the office, and yet employers were hiring new folks, and they needed a way to continue working with the assumption of eventually returning to the office. But now we have employers that employ a workforce that is much more remote. And so the question is, how are employers now able to do remote inspections? The reality is that they have employees scattered all over. And so employers are asking, like, hey, do we need to have an office in the state where the inspection's being done? Do we have to physically travel and meet our employees? And thankfully, the answer to that is no. Like, you can still reasonably rely on an agent to do the inspection. Often law firms can serve as agents. There are some third parties out there that are on a national level promoting themselves as vendors who will do these inspections for you. And the same requirements of due diligence that, let's say, if it was a employee of the organization doing the inspection, the employer remains liable to the same extent. So if an employer decides to use an outside provider, that they just need to be, aware that they still have the due diligence obligations that would apply if it was one of their own employees doing the inspection.
Yeah, I think that this is definitely going to be a question that's going to come up a lot just with the remote work aspect, because though COVID is, has dissipated and we're not in a pandemic anymore, everyone still is remote in a lot of industries, or it's really expanded the employment pool. So it's going to be an interesting situation for employers to find these representatives. I think, they can also use their counsel and to help with that process as well. But I just love this example of another way that a new business model has popped up because of COVID, where it's like, oh, we'll be your I-9 compliance folks. But I think it's always really important to note, as you did, Mo, that doesn't mean that as the employer, you get to just push off your obligations. You still have to be really thoughtful and thorough about the way you're doing this, even if you are going to engage a service or one of these businesses that have popped up to do this. We see that in a lot of different things in the employment field right now. A lot of folks are using artificial intelligence, for instance, to vet candidates and things. And it's like, the more the employers are off outsourcing and putting these things off to other vendors, it can give them almost a false sense of, oh, well, I had someone else handle that, so I'm all good. I'm all set. I don't need to worry about this. And that's really not the case with these types of compliance issues. And you still need to be really mindful of whether these things were done properly.
Absolutely. It's because there are a few different variables at play here. What's interesting, another layer to this whole situation is that, the obligations are there are 2 or 3 different obligations. One is that the re-verification and the physical review so are 2 different ideas. So one is that, okay, back in March 2020 timeframe and onwards, like there is the idea that documents that were reviewed remotely a year and a half, 2 years ago, now employers have to go and review them physically. So instead of looking at electronic copies of those documents, they're looking at actual physical documents. And then there's another piece, because what if those original documents that were valid back then have now expired? So now do you have to ask them for present valid documents? Let's say they had a student visa work authorization that was valid for 1 year back then, and now when you go back and revisit this form, you'll have to look at, okay, oh, is this date expired? So now I have to ask for something else, right? And then at the same time, yes, like what you were saying about the obligation of the employer staying the same, that, okay, even though there's now a vendor who can do this for you, but that doesn't mean that's the end of the obligation, right? It's if there's any fraud, if there's any failure to disclose information, or if the vendor is not fully diligent about checking the right type of documents, the employer can be liable, and therefore, for sure, I encourage our clients always to consult with us. Like, we are happy to take a second set of eyes, like look at the documents to make sure that what the vendor is representing is actually correct and informed.
Yeah, and that's another area. I think you bring up some good points here too around timing, because you don't know what you're going to encounter as part of this process, right? So July 31st is when these flexibilities that we've described as far as the virtual reviews and things are expiring, and then employers who have been using the COVID-19 flexibilities have until August 30th, 2023 to complete the physical inspection. Well, that might seem like a good amount of time, right? But if you get in there and then you start realizing that, oh, well, maybe now since March 2020, your employee can't find their documents. They can't find, they misplaced them somewhere, or because they weren't really expecting this and it's not top of their mind. So there might be some back and forth, and it might take them a little while to get you what you need. You might run into issues, as you just described, Mo, where the documentation is no longer valid. So definitely something I think to stay on top of. And I mean, now is, we're recording this on June 20th. So no time like the present. If you hired employees using these flexibilities during COVID, to start taking a look, letting the employees know that you're going to have to be taking a look at these documents and actually engaging in this process. Because part of it, even if you're using a vendor, well, you might need to, you need to make sure the employee can get there, and how, depending on where they live and transportation and those types of things, the type of industry, there's a lot of things that can come up as part of this process. Because it's a little bit of an off-cycle process. It's not something that is going to be expected by the employee necessarily. They're not following this, I'm sure. They gave the documents when they started, and didn't think about it again, right? So I think that's something really important to think about as far as timing is concerned.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense, because it does sound like, okay, we've got like a month window between July 31 to the end of August to where there's like a period of time that employers are allowed to kind of bring their paperwork up to the new requirements, but that can be a short amount of time depending on the size of the workforce, the nature of the industry, where people are, and how the documents have been stored. So like you said, I mean, someone may have misplaced an original that they once had, and so I definitely, the sooner that people start looking into their files and sort of being proactive, so that there's not any last minute headaches, and just a couple of small items. Like, one of the things that you know, can change is that the person or the entity that did the remote inspection back in whenever it was done, if it's the same person doing the physical inspection, then they're just certifying that, yes, I saw this document many months ago, and now I'm certifying again that I've seen the physical again. However, if you've got a completely new person doing the physical inspection, then that information has to be filled out in the section 2 of the form I-9, and then attach a new, like a section 2 to the remote inspection form that was done prior. So yeah, I mean, it can be for employers that and there's another interesting thing is that we're not, I mean, this compliance applies across the board to US citizens, permanent residents, foreign nationals. So we're not talking about simply, making a small subset of files that deals with foreign nationals. You can have, hundreds of employees that are scattered across the country. And then within that, there's a subset of foreign nationals where you have certain, nuance to the kinds of documents they present. But then, the baseline doesn't really change. Like, so, whether you're looking at a passport with a visa stamp or a green card or a US citizenship certificate, like, those inspections have to be done thoroughly, and reviewing lists of what are acceptable documents, is important. And the same, we can talk, I mean, I always tell my clients, like, just because someone has a social security card, it doesn't mean that they're authorized to work. You've got to dig deeper and ask for more documents that are on the lists in the I-9.
Yeah, and just to wrap us up here, Mo, is also just to talk about the fact that, why should employers care about this and care about being compliant? And obviously, as the attorneys, we always tell people to be compliant, but because that's our job, and compliance is a big part of our job for our clients. But there are penalties associated with this. With lack of compliance, the Department of Labor is who enforces these laws and who ensures compliance. And so, this is something they'll be looking out for just now that this has changed. And so there's a actual fee and penalty cost to this if you're not in compliance, but also a practical business side of things, depending on your industry. If you have a lot of folks that maybe have, different backgrounds, you're employing folks that are from other countries, different things. If you've got big groups of people like that and you don't have everything together, then that could mean losing those people, and losing part of your workforce and having a practical cost as well. So, it is an important topic and something to pay attention to, not just a bunch of forms your lawyer makes you deal with.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the idea is that there are certain obligations that are, they're not super complex, but they're complex enough that, we recommend consulting with us, so we can clarify what the consequences might be. Like, sometimes an innocent failure, simple, very, not an intentional misrepresentation, but a simple sort of oversight can create a situation where there can be a fine imposed, where if there's a random audit, the Department of Labor can ask for I-9 files and start looking at them, and there may be something in there that unintentionally, creates liability. So it's always better to be, like, safe than sorry, and as lawyers in this field, Sarah, you and I, we help our clients to retain the workforce, hire the best talent, and help them in, you know, reducing the amount of time that they need to spend on worrying about legalities. So, and in this process, I found that hiring foreign workers has been very rewarding to many of our clients, and most of them operate without really any significant financial extra costs or any legal complications. So I'm saying this for those employers who are kind of maybe new to this, to not be afraid, just because there's this idea that, oh my gosh, the paperwork burden is so great. We can help simplify it, and with practice, it becomes easy to master.
Yeah. Yeah. And we always, as attorneys, we always like the proactive folks. We're always here to help when stuff hits the fan, right? But being proactive, especially in this instance, it's definitely doable. It's not overly burdensome. It's just that might need a little help working through the more complex situations and making sure you're compliant. So, but we'll definitely include our contact information if anyone like to reach out, and enjoyed our conversation today, Mo. And
yeah,
thanks for your insight.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sarah. And I'll just add that we will be posting a blog article that will have more useful links, and definitely encourage folks to look at the Department of Labor website as well as the USCIS websites with ongoing updates, because as often happens, there's a change in a program, and as soon as it's announced, there are glitches that reveal themselves, and there's modifications, or the program change gets put on hold. So keep watching the social media and relevant websites, and we would be happy. Like you'll have our we'll put our contact information in this video on at the end somewhere, and please feel free to reach out to either one of us.
Great advice. Thanks, Sam.
Good luck. Thanks.